Today we're gonna sculpt with this. We're gonna follow the way of the water and sculpt Neytiri from Avatar with a water simulation. Thank you to Masterworks for sponsoring this video. More on how you can buy a piece of some of the most famous artworks in the world and potentially get a return on your investment in the future later. The problem is with this sort of simulation, it looks like very blocky and doesn't really give me much that I can work with. So I kind of played around with it and I found like this sort of simulation worked a little better. This is now a zero gravity simulation with like a turbulence in there so that it kind of spreads apart the simulation or the particles, and that's what we're going to use for today. I've added a little bit of noise so that it's kind of random basically. So every time you change the seed, the water looks a little different. The seed is number 90. So now let's see what kind of shape we get and what we kind of have to work with here. Looks kind of like a fish maybe, underwater snail. I'm kind of scared because I've never done this before. I think I want to use this one. So now I'm just kind of trying basically to I need to basically now somehow combine these things back together and create some sort of a head out of it. So we can now just select the shape and we can bring it closer to where it was before. So we can of course also rotate things so that we can actually shape this into what we want it to be. We can also scale stuff. So if I want to make this bigger, for example, to fill this bigger hole here in the back. Oh, okay. Maybe not that big. I'm sorry. The water's a little temperamental right now. I see. This will probably be like sort of the base here in this area. And now, that's what I'm going to do to, create the the base shape that we're going to work with. So the biggest problem were the big shapes that were together in these long strings that I wanted to tackle first, just because it's hard to fit them in the end, just because they can change the shape so much. So I started defining the main silhouette with these big shapes first, which sort of worked, and then I can fill the gaps with these smaller shapes so that I can create something that looks somewhat like a, I guess, neck or head or something that looks a little human if you squint your eyes. So, I guess for this challenge, the main goal was really just to bring the drops back together into a shape that I could then use to sculpt Neytiri out of. 30 minutes later, I've combined them all. So now let me show you another trick that I'm going to use. First of all, we have all these little appendages here. We can just select them and then we can say mask and cut them off. There you go. And then if we remesh it now, you can see, ooh, we have this thing. Now I want to, just to actually walk twice as fast, I want to mirror this. So now that we have this basic shape, I'm going to now try to turn this into a head looking thing. Sculpting with this as a base wasn't really that different than just using a sphere, just because you have this end goal of a shape in mind, which of course is, a head with a neck, and the only big difference is where you start from. I tried to go back to the basics, laying down the foundation of the head shape and the body shape, and then adding stuff like the eyes and nose and all the basic parts of the face, so that I can see if the proportions look right, if I need to change something. And once all the basic parts of the face and the body are there, I can then see if I need to adjust any proportions or if there's anything I need to add still. Adding a little bit of muscles always helps, making it look more like an actual body. And then also always keeping in mind that the proportions of Avatar, of course, are a little different. What are the differences between humans and Na'vi? They're basically combined tiger with human. I guess you could call them a human, which means that we first of all have the nose. The nose basically goes in one over to the forehead, basically to the eyebrows. There's no like indent or whatever like we would have as humans. Even if we just look at the side or at the front view, you can see the shape of the nose is a little different. Another, of course, big difference is also that the eyes are a little further apart, and also the eyes themselves are bigger, the eyeballs. Or at least it looks like that because the iris is, much bigger. Let's add some hair and, refine the face a little bit so that it looks a little bit more like her. The hair sculpt itself is not really that important, just because I'm going to replace it in the end anyway. It's just like a placeholder that I can use to see what the proportions with the hair will look like. Every character looks different without hair or with hair, so adding the hair will also show you whether you need to change some proportions, which I'm going to refine afterwards as well. Adding the hair too late can really show you some mistakes that you could have fixed beforehand. And to refine the face, I just, add more geometry so that we can add more details to the individual parts of the face. I first of all make everything sharper and more defined, because beforehand it's very smooth and not really realistic looking. And because the rough sculpt already creates all the big shapes, I can now focus a little bit more on the smaller shapes, like for example the fat above the eye, and smaller things, smaller, I guess, shapes that make up the face made from fat pads, bones, or muscles that are kind of hard to recreate in a very low resolution sculpt. For this, because I don't really have these huge eyeballs that Navi have, I needed to create my own custom eyeballs. In the beginning, I just created a very, very basic eye shader that just kind of helps me see what the end result will kind of look like. It's not going to change that much more, it's just going to become more detailed. And then once the eyes are in place, it's all about just fixing a few things here and there until we have the refined sculpt. And then all that's left is to clean up the geometry. Let's now add some colors to her. First, of course, we have the base color, which is kind of this cyan blue. The way I like to begin my coloring is by blocking out the colors first. So the base color, like this blue, and then I also need sort of like a pinkish blue tone. And then, of course, we also need a color for the stripes. So let's begin with the pink, because that's the easiest one. Blocking out the pink bits, like for example the eye, not trying to make it perfect, because the refining comes later. Maybe just a little bit like that. And like a hint of pink here. Of course, we could also think about adding some more color variation, like just adding like a slight pinkish tone there, but I think I want to keep it more natural. I think you would kind of add that there if you want to have like a makeup on the character. So now we can go and add these stripes. Enable stabilize stroke. It doesn't have to be perfect. I just want to create like the base for it. So this one is a little bit more, you need to be a little bit more careful with your strokes. Okay. This is a very tedious piece of work, but it has been done. Now we come to the fun part, which is we're going to actually add some realism into this. So now we have this, we have these individual blobs of color because of what kind of texture we're using. What we want to use is probably random. Rake and random will help as well. So we get this kind of look. And now we can use this for the edge here, and look at that. We get this nice edge feathering, which will make this look way more realistic. And now finally, the skin has some randomness. It looks way more natural than it did before. Like adding these little dots right here, or adding like just overall more imperfections to make it look more natural. So here's the color now. It looks pretty nice, I think. Of course, you know, the thing that is missing then is the hair. So hair in Blender works just like in real life. You have a bald head, and then you grab the add brush and just add, you know, more hair to the surface. And once the hair is on the head, we just grab the good old comb and we can bring it back. There you go, and we have a nice looking hairstyle. Look at that, isn't that beautiful? But of course, this looks kind of boring because we have all these weird noodles hanging off of her head. So a way to fix that would be to use geometry nodes, basically a system to change the appearance of these curves. So if I now allow or enable this, we can see we can turn it into some nice braids. Look at that, doesn't that look beautiful? I'm just gonna fill, you know, the head with these braids, add some more details, add the eyelashes as well, of course, and that's basically everything to finish Neytiri. When I think back to the first 3D movies I've watched when I was a kid, it must have been so hard to get into that industry or 3D in general back then. The same was the case for aspiring traditional artists and consumers. But now with Blender and today's sponsor Masterworks, we have an easy access point into these industries. I think most of us would love to create art all day if we didn't have to worry about our finances. But that doesn't mean we need to only work for our money. We can also make our money work for us. Investing in the stock market, real estate, or cryptocurrency are ways to do that. And such markets also exist for art. Wealthy people like to buy artworks of famous artists because these are not necessarily tied to these big markets and the possibility of them crashing, which we've all probably heard of before. They buy them not only because they look great, but also as an investment, which is part of its own market to diversify their portfolio and insulate their wealth. I've recently started setting up my own investment plan, so I have to worry less about my financial future, and I highly encourage everyone to at least learn about it. But of course I could never afford buying a piece by Picasso or Warhol. And thanks to today's sponsor, I and you don't have to do that. Masterworks allows you to invest in famous art pieces without having to pay millions of dollars. They buy the artwork, qualify each offering with the SEC, and you can buy and sell shares of that piece until Masterworks sells the piece again for a higher price, distributing the returns to the investors like you. Over the last 26 years, contemporary art pieces have outpaced the S&P 500 by 131%. And by 2026, financial experts predict the global value of art to grow by 58%. So far since 2017, Masterworks has sold 5 paintings with an average net return of 26.8% to investors. I don't want you to think that this is a safe way to double your money or get rich quick. It's another way to invest your money that may be more interesting than investing in companies that you don't really care about. Nearly 600,000 people have signed up so far, and my subscribers can get a priority access and skip the waiting list at the link in the description. Thanks once again Masterworks for sponsoring this video.